Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. Let's see what's on today's itinerary. It is Hollywood's biggest night, as we've been told over and over again. I printed out a nice little neat Oscar spreadsheet because what does this need to make it less fun than a spreadsheet? I asked you, and I've made one just that way I have it so I can write on the spreadsheet. That way I have notes for when I record tomorrow morning's episode of 30-minute reviews about who won, who lost, and all of that cool stuff. So I have that all set to go and ready and all of that. That way I can watch and just, take notes as is, fun. But I got my picks in front of me. And if you want to hear my picks, you can go back through. There was an old episode where I did my picks. I believe I was on 30-minute reviews. Or you can go to the Smithtown Chronicle. I put up an article a few weeks ago where I did all of my picks on there as well. Nothing has changed. I just have new picks for the short categories because I've seen all of the live action shorts, all of the animated shorts, and I've seen one of the documentary shorts. So I'm just going to go over it again real quick just so everyone's on the same page, considering it is now 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern Time. So, why not have everyone on the same page so everyone knows where we are, what I've picked, and all of that. So, Best Picture, Belfast. Best Director, Jane Campion for The Power of the Dog. Best Lead Actor, Andrew Garfield for Tick, Tick, Boom. I actually love that movie. I don't know if that's been clear yet. Best Lead Actress, I put Kristen Stewart for Spencer. Best Supporting Actor, I said Ciarán Hinds from Belfast. Best Supporting Actress, Kristen Dunst from The Power of the Dog. Best Adapted Screenplay, Coda. Best Original Screenplay, Licorice Pizza. Best Cinematography, The Power of the Dog. Best Animated Feature, The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Best Costume Design, Cruella. Best Original Score, Dune. Best Sound, Dune. Best Original Song, No Time to Die. Best Documentary Feature, Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. Best Film Editing, Tick, Tick, Boom. Best International Feature, Drive My Car. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, The Eyes of Tammy Faye. Best Production Design, Dune. Best Visual Effects, Dune. And Best Animated Short, Robin Robin. Best Documentary Short, Audible. And Best Live Action Short, The Long Goodbye. Those are my picks for what's going to win. So that's what we have going into the Academy Awards this evening. Now, that's not what we're here to talk about, though. We are here to talk about The Dropout. As I said yesterday, I was sick last week, and, when I'm sick, I can't focus on anything new, which is why I still haven't finished DMZ yet. And then on top of it, I was given the first 4 episodes of, what's that show? Moon Knight. So I had to watch 4 episodes of Moon Knight. That review will go up on Tuesday morning once the review embargo lifts. So, yeah, all around good times, but I was kind of falling behind and stuff. I did catch up on The Dropout, episodes 5 and 6. I watched those last night. So, let's dive into what we think of that, as we look at what this show has kind of become. Now, I think that my big problem is there's not enough of a focus in this show on what is the end game of the fraud for Elizabeth Holmes. And that's been a complaint that if you listen to my other episodes talking about it, it's been kind of a common complaint across the entire thing. Where I think that, is she just trying to make a ton of money? Is that why she's doing all of this? Is it, and the thing is, it's like, because there's definitely a case to be made when you watch the show that it's not it's not a scheme to make her rich, but it's kind of like she has a producer's style, massive fraud going on, purely so that way eventually she'll get to the point where she can make good on the promises that she's made. Where it's like the idea that, that's I think part of what's missing for me is an explanation as to is her claim out of the gate entirely impossible? Because that's something that Laurie Metcalf's character kind of shines doubt onto, is that, what she's alleging is happening here is just categorically impossible. Like, this can't happen, and the show doesn't really explain why. Like, we see why it's not working, and we see what steps are being taken to perpetrate the fraud, and how far-reaching the fraud is, but to say that it's it's a little bit of a confusing endeavor, to say the least. That, how do I put this? Like, to say that the fraud was entirely on her shoulders, it's apparently more and more obvious that is not 100% the case, because it appears that, it is very far-reaching, and people are going all around. The scene where Ian commits suicide is just heartbreaking. There's something about animals reacting to death that will always break my heart. Like, that was something that got me in A Star Is Born. When Bradley Cooper, he gives the dog a steak, and then he goes and hangs himself in the garage, and the dog is just desperately trying to get in to save him. It's just so, that's always going to get me. It's like these two dogs visibly agitated outside the bathroom door as he's inside and he's overdosed. And, these two dogs outside, desperately pawing at it to get in, while the wife is screaming for it. It's so well done. It's just so heartbreaking. And that actually happened too, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the things that, this show is good at building drama and building all of that, but there's so much in it that just doesn't feel, explained enough. I feel like I'm waiting for the reveal, the big reveal at the end of how the magician did this trick. That feels like what we're headed towards here. That feels like where this story needs to end up. There needs to be a prestige, for lack of a better word, to point out, this is how this happened, and this is why this happened the way it is. But that's the explanation I'm waiting for, and it hasn't come yet. And the show is kind of portraying it where it's look, she's getting, absolutely, William H. Macy is doing it just because he's pissed off about the lawsuit. Absolutely, it's a personal vendetta that he has against her. That's something that's not, really nebulous. But the fact that people are going after her, it's well, was this because she's a woman and all of that? And they're well, it's not because she's a woman, she's committing fraud. But then we see, again, I come back to this question: where did the fraud start? Who was at what point does the fraud begin? At what point do they convert from doing, purely, from attempting to do something good and moving into, pure, being a purely fraudulent enterprise? At what point does that crossover happen? And the show hasn't really explained that, because we've reached a point now where we're now through the rabbit hole of what's going on with this, what's going on in terms of the actual crime, but we never got an explanation as to what caused the switch. And I don't think that the explanation early on, where it's okay, so we're gonna fudge the number, we're gonna fudge the sample a little bit here, and then move on from there. The idea that was the thing that kind of pushed them, where it's okay, so we did this, and then we're gonna get away with this, we're gonna get away with this. I hate criticizing it because it's it doesn't make sense narratively, but it also is reality. But to be fair, it feels like the kind of thing that, doesn't quite mesh. There is a way to do this that doesn't feel like it's a a decision that's being made purely because we can get away with it. We have gotten away with it so far, and we will continue to get away with it. And I think it's a little bit of a misstep on the part of the show. that said, it's still very well done. The show is still very interesting and still can grab your attention and make you tune in every week. And Amanda Seyfried's performance is still great. Naveen Andrews is great still. And then there's also like the new add-on, the new character that we get later on, where it's like, we see, like, I think at one point when I was talking about episode 4, when the Walgreens guys came in, and it's like, there's a almost willingness to have the wool be pulled over their eyes. Like, there's almost this desire to, like, the desire to not see the fraud, even when the fraud's in front of them. And we see that here, at this point, where it's like, now the evidence is being brought to Secretary of State, who's on the board, played by Sam Waterston, whose name I'm forgetting. But the evidence is being brought to him, and he's like, well, I don't believe it. Like, he just doesn't want to look at it. And it's kind of like this thing where it's like, it's 2013, and it's the beginning of this idea where it's like the evidence is there in front of you, and we can look at the physical evidence, but just, I don't want to believe the evidence. So you can do whatever you can do whatever, but I don't want to look like, I just think you're misunderstanding what it is and showing it to me and trying to explain it to me and make them look bad. And it's this idea of, all of that. And it's an interesting kind of, juxtaposition when it comes to how that relates to reality. Yeah. I mean, look, the show is great. I'm not saying the show is not good. I'm not saying that there's an issue. But there is a tonal dissonance, I would say, where it's not exactly explicit where the issue is. Like, at what point does the fraud begin? At what point does the, like, there are a lot of questions that don't really add up. Like, and things like that are key aspects of the story. If we're going to tell the story of Elizabeth Holmes, like, Elizabeth Holmes at this point, she's the founder of Theranos, but she's also massive fraud. And she's now convicted of massive scale fraud. And we can't sit here and be like, oh, well, why, like, we gotta, you can't tell the story and omit the fact of, where does the fraud begin? At what point does that enter the story in a way that it's, yeah, we can make the claim that it's normalized by what happens when they're going to pitch to AstraZeneca in episode 2 or episode 3. But if we're at that point and that's where the Edison, and we're okay with the fraud there, and that's what we're going to do, and say that because of that we're okay with everything else, it feels kind of like, there needs to be more that pushes them away from doing the right thing and doing the easy thing. Like, unless that's just what they're saying, is that it's just they fell onto the slippery slope of doing what's easy instead of what's right. And then, one thing cascaded into the next, into the next, into the next, and we ended up where we are at, at this point. If that's the case, then I can understand that and be like, oh, okay, I see where this is headed. Now, look, I think that there's I think that that's kind of the thing, is that it leaves it open for interpretation, but for a story like this, you can't have it open for interpretation, especially considering what this woman meant for, the progress of women in science is, where it's like, I think that what this show could have done in a better way was, there is a way to walk that tightrope, where it's like, yes, this investigation occurred, like, if that's what it's positing, because I'm not even sure that that's what it's positing. I know that there have been, think pieces in the past about how it's like, look, if this was a guy doing this, this would not be, this investigation would not have happened. Like, this, we wouldn't have seen this, and then years from now we would have found out that, oh, we were doing this in the beginning, but oh, haha, it all worked out, so it's okay. Like, that kind of thing is an argument to be made. And the show's kind of unraveling that, but here's the thing, is the way the fraud is kind of tiered onto itself and kind of explained within the confines of the show, the issue becomes it's not designed where, like, the way it is laid out, it's like someone was going to find out eventually, as it ended up happening, where it's like, look, the way that it's laid out and what was the fraudulent behavior and at what point in the process, it doesn't appear that it doesn't appear that it was designed to what's the word I'm looking for here? Keep people from finding out. No, because it's like it is still kind of hidden behind closed doors, but the problem is it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, if this wasn't based on a true story, like, I'm watching this and I'm like, you mean to tell me that it was it took one person this long to be like, hey, this is wrong? Like, it took them this long for someone to finally come forward and be like, hey, what the fuck? Like, it's that kind of thing, and it goes along with, like, the idea of, like, how far will people go to follow instructions for a good job, good pay, and all of that. And it's like, I don't know. It feels kind of silly to me. I don't know. It's just one of those things where it could be better handled in the confines of the show. Where it's like, you mean to tell me that it took one person, it took them that long for someone to come in and be like, hey, wait, you're diluting the samples. Why are you diluting the samples? And it's like, that one person, and no one else is like, oh, that's a problem. Like, and then it's like someone gets fired for raising that question, and then that's when people start to come forward, where it's like, oh, something's going wrong now. But you mean to tell me that doctors and stuff weren't like, what the fuck? Why are you doing this? Like, I really, like, I don't like that approach where it's like, oh, it was, like, there is blame to go to her. Like, there is 100% blame to go to her. But there were a lot of people entirely down the line of this thing that were 100% on board with and helping to commit this large-scale fraud. And had it not been for her, they wouldn't have happened. But at the same time, any one of them could have stepped forward at any point and been like, oh, by the way, like, there's something not right about this. Like, there's something inherently wrong with how they're handling this problem. It's just so silly to me that like, that's where this is. So yeah. The show's good. I mean, I still enjoy it. Like, I think that these questions are things that are raised, and I think that they're not to do with the issues at hand. It's more to do with the show's portrayal of the issues at hand. And, there's always a possibility that we get to the end of the show and these issues kind of resolve themselves within the confines of the show. And maybe it's just because it's a chronological take, and they kind of abandoned the deposition framing device early on that they had in the first 2 episodes or so. But it really does create this sense of, maybe when they do get into the depositions and the investigations a little bit more in depth, they'll be like, okay, so here's who did what, when, and how they knew, and all of that, where there is, blame to go around. I mean, look, and there is an explanation as to why it happened. Maybe there are internal memos that are like, okay, so we have this problem, like, this machine will never work, like, so we got to do this, and it's like, okay, well, they're going to gut the machines from Siemens and use those, and there's a lot of things here that don't add up, but in a world where this is, what's what I'm looking for here? In a world where we're supposed to buy into all of this and be like, okay, so all of this was happening. Like, again, I still don't know what the goal of her fraud is, which is a big part of why a fraud's being committed. It's like, like I said, there are 2 possible explanations as the show kind of lays it out. Number 1, it's the tech will eventually be ready, but they need to fabricate information to make sure the tech is ready. And number 2, it's she just wants to get rich. And the show does a lot to kind of illustrate, because it's like, dealing with deadlines. She's got the deadline with Walgreens, and she's got all of this stuff that's kind of mounting as the show goes on. And as she's dealing with all of that, that's when the worst of the fraud kind of continues to happen and happen and get worse and continue. And to say that, all of a sudden we have to, I feel like that's kind of the case they're trying to make, is that, the idea was that it would eventually work, but they got caught up with before it could work because they were investigated at a point where no one else would have been investigated because of the constant questioning that goes along with her being a woman in this position of power. And I feel like that's the case that's trying to be made here. But again, there's too widespread fraud, and the fraud is too deeply permeated into the fabric of Theranos that it feels good, that works as an explanation, in my opinion. Where it's like, look, I mean, if the fraud was just things like what we see in the like what we see in the show, where it's like, oh, they're fudging the numbers, oh, they're using these machines instead of this machine, oh, they're not doing on-site stuff, they're doing this instead to kind of mask what they're doing and all of that, where it's like, the amount of things that would need to go right, I guess, for these situations to arise in the way that the show is, I don't want to say postulating, but the way that it's laid out, I feel like there's definitely a disconnect in that explanation. So we'll wrap up there for today. We'll be back with Moon Knight on Tuesday and Morbius, the Living Vampire, on Thursday. One of those will be a lot better than the other. And then, what else is there this week? The Consultant, I'm seeing on Saturday. The new movie from Chris Pine's in it, about a former police officer, former military person. If you check out 30-minute reviews tomorrow morning, I will have a review or a discussion of the Oscar winners. I have my spreadsheet, and we will be back with all of that later this week. So until then, have a great rest of your weeks.